70 years of sanctions, covert action, and nuclear brinkmanship between Washington and Tehran ended not with a deal, but with the largest joint U.S. and Israeli air campaign since Iraq. 200 fighters, 120 cruise missiles, 250 autonomous drones, and roughly 500 targets. They called it Epic Fury. But the story begins 1 year earlier with a strike the Pentagon itself could not agree had worked. In 1953, Tehran became the stage for Operation Ajax, a CIA and MI6 coup that ousted Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh and restored the Shah. Western oil interests regained control, but the legacy was mistrust. Iran's leaders absorbed the lesson. Foreign powers could topple governments, and vigilance against subversion became a constant. In Washington, covert intervention was now seen as a viable tool for regional influence. The 1979 Islamic Revolution swept away the Shah's regime. Student militants seized the United States Embassy, holding 52 Americans hostage for 444 days. The nightly images of blindfolded diplomats and burning flags hardened attitudes on both sides. Iran's new government enshrined resistance to outside interference, while the United States shifted toward sanctions and economic pressure, wary of direct military entanglement after the failed rescue attempt. April 1988 brought Operation Praying Mantis. After an Iranian mine crippled the USS Samuel B. Roberts, the United States Navy struck back, sinking 2 Iranian warships, a frigate, and destroying oil platforms. This was the largest American naval action since Vietnam, a display of overwhelming force that pushed Iran to develop asymmetric tactics and rely on proxies across the region. January 2020, a United States drone strike killed Qasem Soleimani, head of Iran's Quds Force, outside Baghdad airport. The targeted killing followed months of Iranian-backed attacks and signaled a return to decapitation strikes. Iran responded by elevating Soleimani as a martyr and ramping up missile and proxy operations. The United States weighed escalation against disruption. Over decades, each confrontation left deeper scars. Iran hardened its nuclear sites and command networks. The United States and Israel expanded intelligence ties. By 2024, the logic of preemption and deterrence shaped every move, making the next strike feel inevitable. On June 21, 2025, Operation Midnight Hammer began with the launch of 7 B-2 Spirit stealth bombers from Whiteman Air Force Base. Each aircraft carried the GBU-57 Massive Ordnance Penetrator, 30 tons of precision-guided force, designed to breach Iran's most fortified nuclear facilities. After 3 in-flight refuelings over the Arabian Sea, the bombers crossed into Iranian airspace under the cover of electronic warfare teams that jammed early warning radars and disrupted command networks. At 0430 Coordinated Universal Time on June 22nd, the first penetrator struck Fordow's underground cascade chambers, followed minutes later by impacts at Natanz and Isfahan. Simultaneously, U.S. Navy destroyers and a submarine in the Gulf launched over 40 Tomahawk cruise missiles at Iranian air defense nodes and missile control centers. Within hours, satellite imagery confirmed craters at Natanz and partial collapse of Fordow's surface structures. The Pentagon declared a decisive setback for Iran's enrichment program, citing a 45% reduction in Natanz's centrifuge capacity and a 6 to 8 week delay at Fordow. Yet the DIA circulated a classified memo challenging these claims. DIA analysts, relying on intercepted communications and rapid post-strike imagery, estimated that up to 70% of Fordow's centrifuges remained repairable, and that the IRGC's command network had already begun to reconstitute via redundant mesh links. Civilian infrastructure near Natanz suffered temporary power outages, affecting tens of thousands, while independent monitors detected low-level radioactive dust, well below international safety thresholds. Iran responded by expelling IAEA inspectors and accelerating construction at the Pickaxe mountain complex. Publicly, U.S. officials described the operation as a temporary measure to forestall an imminent breakout. Inside the Pentagon, debate persisted over whether the kinetic blow had truly set back Iran's nuclear ambitions, or simply forced a rapid and more elusive restructuring. The split between public triumph and classified skepticism set the stage for Tehran's next move. Iran's immediate response to Operation Midnight Hammer was both methodical and urgent. Within days, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps began dispersing its command structure, abandoning large, centralized bunkers in favor of a network of microcenters scattered across the Iranian plateau. Each node operated with its own backup power, mesh-linked radios, and encrypted satellite connections, making coordinated decapitation strikes far more difficult. At the same time, construction crews accelerated work at Pickaxe Mountain, a facility buried 1,800 meters beneath the Zagros, shielded by layers of rock and reinforced concrete. Open-source satellite imagery revealed fresh excavation scars, new ventilation shafts, and a surge in heavy equipment activity, all confirming the rapid expansion of a site designed to outlast even the most advanced bunker-busting munitions. Inside Iran's cities, the regime faced a different kind of threat. As the rial lost half its value in 6 months, protests erupted from Tehran to Shiraz. Security forces imposed rolling internet blackouts, connectivity dropped by nearly half nationwide, and demonstrations were suppressed with lethal force. Human rights monitors estimated hundreds were killed in the first week alone. The focus of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps on survivability and dispersion came at a cost. Cracks widened between the state and its population, and the government's grip on the streets grew less certain with every week of unrest. Iran's leadership now faced dual pressures: external military assault and internal dissent, forcing a recalibration of both its nuclear ambitions and its hold on power. In February 2026, Muscat became the unlikely fulcrum of crisis diplomacy. Omani mediators, drawing on years of discreet shuttle talks, assembled American and Iranian negotiators in a last-ditch effort to broker a freeze on uranium enrichment. The official communiques announced a technical roadmap and provisional International Atomic Energy Agency access, but the reality outside the negotiation rooms told a different story. While diplomats in Geneva and Muscat traded draft language, the United States executed the largest regional force concentration since the 2003 Iraq War. The USS Abraham Lincoln and the USS Gerald R. Ford carrier strike groups steamed into the Arabian Sea, doubling the available air wing to nearly 180 combat aircraft. Surface action groups, Aegis cruisers, and Arleigh Burke-class destroyers stacked up in Fifth Fleet waters, each carrying Tomahawk cruise missiles and layered missile defense. At the same time, the Pentagon accelerated the pre-positioning of Lucas one-way attack drones, quietly stockpiling hundreds of expendable strike assets at forward bases in the United Arab Emirates and on Red Sea support ships. Naval movement logs from late February confirm a tempo of replenishment and readiness drills rarely seen outside declared hostilities. Omani officials insisted the nuclear freeze was genuine. U.S. Naval Command treated every day of talks as a countdown to kinetic action. The gap between diplomatic language and military posture grew impossible to ignore. Negotiations and escalation no longer ran in sequence. They ran in parallel, each track undermining the credibility of the other, as the regional airspace, filled with stealth bombers and carrier sorties, the prospect of a diplomatic breakthrough grew dimmer, replaced by the unmistakable logic of overwhelming force. At 7 a.m. on February 28, 2026, Operation Epic Fury erupted with a scale of force rarely matched in recent memory. From the Arabian Sea, U.S. carrier strike groups launched F-35C aircraft and FA-18E and FA-18F aircraft in coordinated waves, while 120 Tomahawk cruise missiles streaked inland from Arleigh Burke-class destroyers and a Virginia-class submarine. Their targets were missile control centers near Kermanshah, radar arrays deep in the Persian Gulf hinterland, and command bunkers outside Qom. Nearly 200 Israeli fighters, F-15Is, F-16Is, and F-35Is took to the air, marking the largest single-day sortie in Israeli history, striking over 500 military sites from Tehran's outskirts to the Gulf Coast. Electronic warfare teams, including US EA-18G Growlers and Israeli Shavit platforms, jammed Iranian air defense radars and command frequencies. Joint cyber units injected malware into Iran's air defense network, blinding missile batteries and severing command links. The operation's breakthrough came with 250 Lucas one-way attack drones launched from carriers and forward bases, saturating Iranian communication nodes and mobile launchers. Coalition briefings later confirmed the opening phase: 120 Tomahawks, 200 Israeli fighters, 250 Lucas drones. Open-source imagery revealed impact craters and sudden radar blackouts. The U.S. and Israeli command center in Kiryat Gat orchestrated every strike, setting a new standard for joint warfare. Iran's response to Operation Epic Fury arrived with speed and reach few had anticipated. Within hours, ballistic missiles and weaponized drones surged from launch points across the Iranian plateau toward military and economic targets in 8 countries: the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, Iraq, Israel, and the UK base in Cyprus. The attacks were coordinated, leveraging mobile launchers and proxy networks, and designed to saturate regional air defense grids. In the United Arab Emirates alone, 137 incoming missiles were intercepted by a layered defense of Patriot anti-HAAD batteries, according to official communiques. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Israel reported similar barrages, with interception rates hovering near 70% in the opening 48 hours. Yet the volume of fire overwhelmed some systems. Airports in Dubai and Kuwait shut down for days, and oil infrastructure at Ras Tanura and Al Ain suffered damage despite partial neutralization of the salvos. The impact rippled outward. Brent crude prices surged 15% in a single trading session, reaching levels not seen since the 1970s embargo. Airlines rerouted or canceled hundreds of flights across the Gulf, as airspace closures spread from Muscat to Tel Aviv. Emergency sessions at the United Nations convened on March 1st, as diplomats pressed for a ceasefire while markets and civilian life across the region reeled from the shock. The scale and speed of Iran's retaliation revealed both the reach of its missile arsenal and the limits of even the most advanced missile defense networks, turning a regional military crisis into a global economic event. Regional deterrence now hinges on unstable alliances, not just military might. With Iran's leadership fractured and oil markets in flux, escalation risk remains high. The real question is no longer whether Iran can be broken, but what power fills the vacuum when a regional order collapses. Share your perspective below.